My name is Lillian, and I'm 45 years old. I thought I'd done everything right as a mother. When I think back on my life, it's impossible not to see Daniel's face in every corner of it. My son was my beginning and my end, my purpose for everything I did. When he was born, I swore I'd give him the kind of love I never got from my own parents. I was determined that he'd never know loneliness, never question his worth, never feel like he wasn't enough. When my husband walked out on us, Daniel was just 10. I promised myself that his father's absence wouldn't define him. I picked up 2 jobs. Mornings at the library, evenings at the diner. My hands were always tired, my feet always sore. But the sight of Daniel waiting for me with that big grin made every ache worth it. He'd run to me, arms open, shouting, "Mom! You're home!" Those little words were my entire world. We were a team, just us two against the world, I used to say. And for years, that's exactly how it felt. We laughed together, cried together, built dreams together. I went to every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher meeting. I was the loudest cheerleader and the softest shoulder he had. People often said, "You and Daniel are more like best friends than mother and son." And I used to beam with pride hearing that. I thought it meant I was doing something right. But somewhere between the teenage years and adulthood, something started to shift. At first it was small things, fewer hugs, fewer conversations. He stopped telling me about his day, started keeping his phone glued to him, started rolling his eyes when I asked simple questions. I told myself it was normal that every boy goes through this independent phase. I'd seen it in movies, heard about it from other mothers. "Don't worry," they said. "He'll come around. They always do." But Daniel didn't come around. The distance didn't close, it widened. Tried everything to keep our bond alive. I'd make his favorite dinners, chicken pot pie, macaroni and cheese, all the things that used to make him smile. He'd eat quietly, barely looking up from his phone. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd mumble, "Yeah, I'm fine," and disappear into his room. That room, once filled with laughter and conversation, became a locked door between us. I'd press my ear against it sometimes, hearing faint music or the sound of him talking to someone. I used to knock, and he'd say, "Just a sec, Mom," but a sec always turned into hours. I stopped knocking after a while. I didn't want to be that annoying mother who didn't know when to back off. But the truth was, I missed him. I missed my boy, the one who used to run to me when he had nightmares, who'd sit beside me watching cartoons on Saturday mornings. The one who'd make me birthday cards with crooked handwriting and glitter glue. I could feel him slipping away. But I didn't know how to hold on without smothering him. When he graduated high school, I cried through the entire ceremony. Not just because I was proud, but because I felt something breaking an invisible thread that had held us together all those years. He was smiling in his cap and gown, surrounded by friends, and I stood there clutching my camera, realizing he didn't look for me in the crowd like he used to. Still, I told myself it was fine. He was growing up. That's what mothers are supposed to want, right? For their children to fly? But what happens when they fly so far they forget where home is? When he got into college, I helped him pack his things. I labeled every box, folded every shirt, made sure his favorite mug was wrapped carefully in newspaper. I wrote him little notes and hid them in random places inside his shoes, between his books, tucked into his backpack, just tiny reminders that I loved him. When I dropped him off at the dorm, I held him for a moment longer than he wanted. He laughed and said, "Mom, you're being dramatic." I smiled through the lump in my throat and said, "I'm just proud of you." But as I drove home, the silence in the car was deafening. The house felt like a stranger's place when I returned. His room was spotless, empty, a museum of memories. I sat on his bed that night and whispered, "You'll come back, right?" As if saying it aloud could make it true. He did come back for holidays, for short visits, but something had changed that I couldn't quite name. His hugs were quick, his eyes were distant. He spent more time on his phone than with me. I tried not to take it personally, but every time he left, the house felt colder. Then came the day I realized that maybe I hadn't raised the kind of son I thought I had, not because he was bad, but because I'd taught him to love others fiercely while forgetting to teach him to value where he came from. I had no idea that soon, the boy I loved more than life itself would erase me from his world completely. It started with a phone call that felt colder than ice. It was a Thursday afternoon when Daniel called. I remember because I was in the middle of folding laundry, humming to a song on the radio. The moment I heard his voice, I knew something was off. It wasn't the usual, "Hey Mom," full of warmth or laughter. It was distant. Careful, like he was bracing himself to say something unpleasant. He told me he'd found a new apartment and would be moving out that weekend. No build-up, no excitement. Just a flat statement. As if he were reading a weather report. I paused mid-fold, my hands gripping one of his old shirts, a faded blue one I'd bought him years ago. "Oh," I said, trying to sound supportive. That's great, honey. You didn't mention you were looking for a place." "Yeah," he said. "It just happened fast. Natalie found it." Natalie. The name I'd only heard in passing before. He'd mentioned her once or twice, never bringing her around, always brushing off my questions. "She's just someone I'm seeing," he'd said once, smiling faintly. I hadn't pushed. I didn't want to be the overbearing mom. I asked him if he needed help moving, maybe a home-cooked meal for his first night in the new place. He hesitated before replying. "No. It's fine, Mom. I've got it handled." The way he said it, "I've got it handled." After the call ended, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone. My chest felt hollow. I told myself it was normal he was becoming independent, taking control of his life. Isn't that what every mother wants? But the truth was, I could feel him slipping through my fingers. I decided I wouldn't let the moment pass without a gesture. I wanted to show him how proud I was. So I baked his favorite lemon bars that Saturday morning, packed them carefully, and filled a grocery bag with some essentials, new towels, a small plant, and a handwritten note that said, "For your new beginning, love, Mom." I drove to his new apartment unannounced, smiling nervously as I climbed the stairs. When he opened the door, the smile fell right off my face. Daniel looked surprised, not happy, not touched, just surprised. His brows furrowed as he said, "Mom? You should have called first." Behind him, I saw her Natalie standing in the kitchen. She was beautiful. In a polished sort of way. She didn't smile, didn't say hello, just watched me with this look I couldn't quite read, a mix of discomfort and irritation. "I just wanted to drop these off," I said, holding out the bag. "I thought I'd surprise you." "Yeah, but you can't just show up like this," he said quickly, glancing over his shoulder at Natalie. My stomach dropped. I'd imagined this moment so differently, hugs, laughter, maybe a photo together, in his new place. Instead, I stood there in the doorway, feeling like an intruder. Natalie finally spoke, her tone polite but firm. "We were just about to head out, actually." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, I won't keep you." Daniel took the bag from my hands but didn't open it. He didn't even look inside. "Thanks, Mom," he said flatly. I tried to hold on to my composure, tried not to let my voice shake when I said, "Well, I'm proud of you. You've come a long way." He nodded, but his eyes were already somewhere else with her. I turned to leave, and as I walked down the hallway, I heard the faint click of the door closing behind me. It was such a small sound, but it echoed through me like a gunshot. I reached my car and sat there for a long time, staring at the bag on the passenger seat that I'd meant to bring up another gift I hadn't had the courage to hand him. It was a framed photo of the two of us from his high school graduation. I had wrapped it in tissue paper, tied it with a ribbon. I'd written on the back, "No matter where life takes you, you'll always have a home with me." I couldn't bring myself to give it to him. I couldn't even start the car. I just sat there, listening to the hum of the city outside, the laughter of strangers passing by, and the thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. He hadn't said, "I love you." He hadn't even hugged me goodbye. That night, I placed the photo frame on my nightstand. It felt like a reminder of something that used to be true. Days passed, and I kept waiting for a message, a thank you, an apology for being cold. maybe even an invite to come by again. But nothing came. No text, no call. I told myself he was busy. Maybe Natalie didn't like visitors. Maybe he just needed time to adjust. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered what I didn't want to admit. He didn't want me there. I replayed the moment over and over, the way he looked past me. The way she hovered near him, possessive, protective. I wondered if I'd done something wrong. If I'd embarrassed him somehow. Every memory, every laugh we'd shared felt like a distant echo now. When I tried to sleep that night, the image that haunted me most wasn't Daniel's face. It was the door, the way it closed so gently behind me. When he closed the door behind me that day, it wasn't just a door, it was the end of something sacred. Silence can be louder than any argument. After that day at Daniel's apartment, something inside me shifted. I told myself not to overthink it, that he was just settling in, getting used to his new life, learning to balance independence with family. I wanted to believe it. But days turned into weeks, and the silence between us stretched like an endless road. At first, I waited patiently, checking my phone every few hours. I told myself, he'll call tonight, then, maybe tomorrow. By the end of the week, I'd run out of excuses to comfort myself. So, I texted him. Just something simple. Hey sweetheart, how's the new place? Need anything? He didn't respond that day. Or the next. When the third day passed, I tried again. Miss you, honey. Hope you're doing okay. This time, the message showed 2 blue ticks. He'd read it. But still, nothing. It's strange how those tiny blue marks can feel like a slap in the face, proof that your words were seen but not worth a reply. I started imagining scenarios. Maybe he'd lost his phone. Maybe he was sick. Maybe Natalie didn't like me and asked him to cut back on communication. Each thought twisted tighter in my chest, building a storm I couldn't calm. I tried calling him once, twice, 3 times, straight to voicemail. His recorded message played cheerfully. Hey, it's Daniel. Leave a message and I'll get back to you. Like a cruel reminder of the boy he used to be. I left a message. My voice cracked halfway through. Hi, it's Mom. Just wanted to check in. I hope everything's okay. I love you. Nothing. I waited another week before I called again. Still nothing. Every unanswered call chipped away at me, until I started questioning everything I'd ever done. Had I been too protective? Too emotional? Did I hover too much when he was growing up? I scrolled through our old text threads, the jokes, the photos, the little "love you mom" notes he used to send. I read them until my eyes blurred. The contrast between then and now was unbearable. The next time I texted, I tried to sound casual, almost breezy. Hey, just wanted to remind you to take your vitamins and eat something green once in a while. Blue ticks. No response. I began timing his social media activity. I'd see him post photos with Natalie, brunches, concerts, vacations. His smile was wide, carefree, the same one he used to flash at me. But now it belonged to someone else. One night, I noticed a story he posted, the 2 of them at a beach, laughing as the sun went down. The caption said, "Home is wherever you are." That word home pierced me, because I used to be his home. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, the phone slipping from my hands as tears pooled in my eyes. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just broken. I had poured everything into raising a good man. And now he'd built a life that didn't have room for me. I started second-guessing myself constantly. Maybe I was too involved. Maybe Natalie saw me as a threat. Maybe he felt smothered. But no matter how much I blamed myself, I couldn't ignore the ache of being forgotten by the person I loved most in the world. His birthday was the breaking point. I spent days preparing, baking his favorite chocolate cake, wrapping a small gift, and writing a heartfelt card. I drove to his apartment, even though every instinct told me not to. I placed the gift bag at his doorstep, rang the bell, and left before he could answer. Hours later, I drove back by, just to see if he'd taken it. The bag was still there, untouched. It rained that night. The next morning, I found out from a friend through social media, of course, that Daniel and Natalie had gone on vacation for his birthday. They were smiling in every photo, sunburned and blissfully happy, while my carefully wrapped gift sat soggy and ruined in the rain. I retrieved it myself, tears mixing with the raindrops. I peeled off the ruined wrapping, opened the card I'd written, and stared at my own words. No matter how old you get, you'll always be my baby boy. Something inside me snapped. Not in anger, but in realization. He wasn't my little boy anymore. And maybe, in his new world, there was no space for a mother like me. For days after that, I barely ate. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, pick up my phone, and stare at our old pictures. The silence became so loud it was suffocating. Friends told me to give him time. He'll come around, they said. But they didn't see how deliberate his distance was. He wasn't just busy. He was gone. I'd never known what it felt like to lose someone who was still alive until now. Every morning, I checked my phone hoping for a message that never came. Every night, I fell asleep clutching a photo of him, whispering, "I love you," into the dark, as if the words could somehow reach him. But the truth was, Daniel had moved on, and I was the only one still holding on to something that no longer existed. I didn't know then that silence was only the beginning of my punishment. I showed up at his apartment one Sunday, determined to get answers. It had been nearly 2 months since Daniel last responded to a message, and something inside me finally broke. The endless waiting, the silence, the sleepless nights, it all piled up until I couldn't breathe anymore. I told myself I wasn't going there to beg, I just needed to see my son, to hear from his own mouth what I'd done wrong. That Sunday morning, I stood outside his apartment building with a trembling hand clutching a bag of homemade food. I had baked his favorite lasagna, the one I used to make when he had tough exam weeks or bad days at school. Maybe it was foolish, but part of me hoped that one taste might remind him of home, of love. As I climbed the stairs, I practiced what I would say, calm, reasonable words. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't accuse. I just needed honesty. When I knocked, I heard voices inside his and Natalie's. A moment later, the door swung open, and Daniel stood there in a plain gray t-shirt, looking both surprised and irritated. "Mom, what are you doing here?" His tone wasn't warm. It wasn't even neutral. It was defensive. I forced a smile. "I thought I'd bring you something. I made lasagna." He sighed, stepping slightly into the doorway but not inviting me in. "You could have called first." "I did, Daniel," I said softly. "You didn't answer." He ran a hand through his hair, glancing behind him. That's when I saw her Natalie standing near the kitchen counter. Her arms were crossed, her eyes narrowed, and her whole posture screamed impatience. I tried to smile at her, but she looked right through me. "I just wanted to check on you," I continued, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay composed. "You've been so quiet lately." I was starting to worry. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Mom, I told you, I've just been busy. You don't need to worry so much." "Busy?" I echoed. "Too busy to answer a single message from your own mother? Too busy to tell me you were okay?" His eyes hardened. "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You always make everything about you." I blinked, stunned. "About me? Daniel, I'm your mother. Of course I worry when you disappear without a word." He stepped back, folding his arms. "You don't see it, do you? You've always been controlling. You show up without calling, you text over and over. You don't give me space. It's exhausting." His words hit me like a slap. Controlling? I'd spent my life sacrificing everything for him, my youth, my time, my dreams, and he saw that as control? I felt my throat tighten, but I refused to cry. "I never meant to suffocate you, Daniel. I just love you. I miss you. Is that really such a crime?" Natalie finally spoke up, her tone cutting. "He's just trying to live his own life, Mrs. Harris. You need to let him." Her words stung even more than his. Mrs. Harris. As if I were some stranger at the door. Daniel looked at me, frustration flickering across his face. "She's right, Mom. I'm an adult now. I need space to figure things out without you hovering. I stared at him, my heart breaking in real time. Hovering? You make it sound like I'm some kind of burden. He didn't respond. That silence was worse than anything he could have said. I held up the bag of lasagna with trembling hands. Here, I whispered. At least take this. You haven't eaten a real home-cooked meal in weeks, I'm sure. He hesitated, then finally took the bag, but not with gratitude. More like obligation. Thanks, he muttered. I looked past him, hoping to see something familiar in his home. Something that reminded me of our old life. But it was bare, cold, modern. Nothing of me anywhere. Not a single framed photo, not even the vase I'd given him years ago. It was like I'd never existed in his world. Daniel, I said quietly, I don't know what I did to make you feel like this, but whatever it is, I'm sorry. I just want us to be okay again. He avoided my gaze. It's not that simple. It could be, I insisted, taking a small step forward. If you'd just talk to me. He raised his hand, cutting me off. Mom, please. Just go home. For a moment, I couldn't move. The boy I'd rocked to sleep, kissed goodnight, and fought the world for, was standing there like a stranger. Go home? I whispered. Is that really what you want? He looked at me then, and I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it vanished just as quickly. Yes, Mom. Please. I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. Okay, I said. If that's what you want. I turned away before the tears could spill, before my voice could betray the pain ripping through me. As I reached the stairwell, I heard the door close behind me softly, decisively. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. The world was still turning, people still laughing, but I felt like mine had just stopped. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring at the apartment building, half expecting him to come running after me like he used to when he was a little boy and we argued. But the door stayed closed. And I finally understood he didn't just want space. He wanted freedom from me. When he told me to leave and not come back, I realized my son didn't just want space, he wanted me gone. Losing someone who's still alive is its own kind of death. The days after that confrontation blurred together like watercolor soft edges of pain and confusion bleeding into one another. I moved through my house like a ghost, doing chores without thought, cooking meals I never ate, speaking words that echoed in empty rooms. Every corner of my home was haunted by the life I used to have with Daniel. His laughter used to fill this space. I could almost hear it if I stood still enough, the echo of him running through the hallway, the thud of his feet on the stairs, the sound of his favorite playlist coming from his room. Now it was just silence. The silence was cruel. It reminded me of everything I'd lost, not to death, but to choice. His choice. I used to believe grief came only with funerals, with flowers and condolences. But this was different. This grief had no rituals, no sympathy, no closure. It was a wound that stayed open because he was still out there somewhere breathing. Laughing, living just not with me in his life. Every morning, I woke up with hope clawing at my chest. Maybe today he'll text. Maybe he'll remember I exist. I checked my phone before my eyes had even adjusted to the light. Every time, the screen mocked me with its emptiness. The longer it went on, the harder it became to justify his silence. The excuses I once clung to, that he was busy, distracted, overwhelmed, began to crumble under the weight of reality. He wasn't too busy to post pictures with Natalie. He wasn't too distracted to celebrate holidays, birthdays, and milestones with her family. He'd simply chosen not to include me. I saw photos of him smiling with her parents sitting around their dinner table, arm draped comfortably over Natalie's chair. In one picture, her mother had captioned it, "So grateful for our wonderful family." Family. I stared at that word until it blurred. I wasn't angry at them, they seemed nice enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being replaced. Another woman was sitting where I should have been, laughing with my son, making memories with him. I found myself wandering into his old room one night. The air still smelled faintly of his cologne, even after all those months. The walls were covered with the same posters, the same bookshelf filled with old novels I'd bought him. His bed was neatly made, untouched. I sat on it and felt the weight of years pressing down on me. This room used to be his world. Now, it was just a shrine. I started writing letters to him, not to send, just to release the ache inside me. Some were full of love. Others were full of anger. I told him about the nights I couldn't sleep, about the meals I threw away because eating alone made me sick to my stomach. I told him how I watched the phone like a desperate teenager waiting for a call that would never come. Each letter ended the same way. I love you. I always will. But writing didn't make it better. It only made the absence more real. Friends tried to comfort me. They said things like, "He'll come around," or "He just needs space." They didn't understand. This wasn't about space, it was about erasure. Daniel hadn't just distanced himself. He had deleted me. I began to withdraw from everyone. I stopped going to my book club, stopped answering calls. My world had shrunk to the size of my grief. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found an old box filled with his childhood drawings, stick figures of me and him holding hands under the sun, a crooked heart drawn above our heads. On one of them, in shaky 6-year-old handwriting, he'd written, "Mommy is my best friend forever." I pressed that piece of paper to my chest and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. Where did that boy go? The one who couldn't fall asleep unless I tucked him in? The one who used to whisper, "Love you," before closing his eyes? How does a mother lose her child while he's still alive and thriving? For weeks, I couldn't bear to cook his favorite meals anymore. The kitchen felt like a graveyard of memories, every pot and pan carrying the echo of laughter that no longer filled the room. I stopped playing music too. Even the happy songs hurt. Everywhere I went, I saw reminders of him. Boys his age, laughing with their moms in grocery stores, young men helping their mothers load groceries into cars. I envied them. Not because they had something special, but because they still had what I'd lost. One evening, I saw a mother and son sitting in a cafe window, sharing a dessert and laughing together. It was such a simple, ordinary thing, but I stood there on the sidewalk, staring, tears stinging my eyes. I missed something so simple it hurt to breathe. That night, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were tired, red-rimmed, her shoulders heavy with invisible weight. I realized I had built my entire world around Daniel. Without him, there was nothing left of me. That realization terrified me. So, I tried to fight it. I decided to stop checking my phone so obsessively, to stop refreshing his social media, to stop letting his silence define me. But it wasn't that easy. Healing doesn't come with a switch. Sometimes, I'd go a few hours without thinking of him, and then the guilt would hit. How could I not think about my own son? What kind of mother was I becoming? I prayed every night, not for him to come back, but for strength to live if he never did. And slowly, something in me began to shift. The pain didn't disappear, but it started to change shape. It became quieter, deeper, something I carried instead of something that consumed me. I didn't know it yet, but grief was remolding me not into someone broken, but into someone new. That's when something inside me broke, not from pain, but from awakening. One morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale from too many nights of crying and too few of sleeping. The woman I saw wasn't me, not the Lillian who once laughed at everything, who sang off-key while making breakfast, who used to believe love could fix anything. This woman looked defeated, emptied of purpose, and that's when I realized something brutal but freeing. I had spent my whole life being Daniel's mother, but I had no idea who Lillian was without him. For 23 years, every decision I made, every dream I shelved, every sacrifice, it all revolved around him. His needs, his comfort, his happiness. I never thought twice about it. That's what mothers do. But now, with him gone, I was left with a life that didn't belong to me. That morning, standing in front of the mirror, I whispered to my reflection, "I have to start over. The first step was the hardest, admitting that my story wasn't over just because my son had walked out of it. I started small. I got out of bed early, opened all the windows, and let the sunlight in. It sounds trivial, but for months, I'd kept the curtains drawn, living in a kind of emotional twilight. Letting the light back in was like giving myself permission to exist again. Next, I made coffee and actually sat down to enjoy it instead of letting it go cold on the counter. I put on real clothes instead of pajamas. I even brushed my hair. Each little act felt like reclaiming a part of myself that I'd buried under grief. But the turning point came when I saw an ad online for a local pottery class. I remembered how much I'd loved sculpting back in high school, before life swept me up into work and motherhood. Something about the idea called to me the thought of shaping clay, of making something with my own hands again. I almost didn't sign up. My first instinct was guilt, the voice in my head whispering, "You're wasting money, you're too old, what's the point?" But then another voice, quieter yet stronger, answered, "Because you deserve to feel alive again." So, I went. The first class was awkward. My hands trembled as I worked the clay, my fingers stiff from years of typing and cooking but not creating. The instructor, a kind woman named Teresa, smiled and said, "You're a natural. You just forgot how to play." That word play stuck with me. I'd forgotten how to play. Week after week, I kept going. I started making bowls, cups, tiny vases. Some came out lopsided, others cracked, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I wasn't doing something for anyone else. I wasn't a mother, or an employee, or a caretaker. I was just me. Through pottery, I met women my age, each carrying invisible wounds of their own. One of them, Michelle, became a close friend. She'd lost her husband years ago and understood what it meant to rebuild from ashes. Over coffee after class, she told me, "You've been living through your son's story for too long. Maybe it's time to write your own." Her words hit me like a revelation. That night, I dusted off an old notebook and began writing again. Not letters this time, but stories. My stories. How it felt to be abandoned by someone you raised. How it felt to rediscover yourself after being erased. Writing became therapy. I poured every ounce of pain, anger, and hope into those pages. Eventually, I got brave enough to post one of my essays online, a piece titled "Losing a Child Without a Funeral." I didn't expect anyone to read it, but within days it spread. Comments began to pour in, women from all over the world saying, "This is my story too." Mothers who had been cut off by their children, daughters who felt unseen by their parents. Each message reminded me that I wasn't alone, so I kept writing. Each post became a small act of healing for me and for others. I wrote about grief, forgiveness, and the slow, painful art of letting go. I wasn't preaching, I was surviving out loud. Some nights, I'd imagine Daniel stumbling across my writing, recognizing the pain between the lines, maybe even feeling regret. But I never wrote for him. I wrote for the woman I used to be, the one who thought her life ended the moment her child turned away. As the weeks turned into months, I began to smile again, not forced, not hollow, but real. I went on walks, met new people, even started volunteering at the community center. Every time I helped someone or laughed at something silly, I could feel myself growing stronger. For the first time in years, my happiness wasn't tied to Daniel's. One evening, while cleaning up after pottery class, Teresa handed me a small, uneven vase I'd made early on my first piece. "Keep this," she said. "It's imperfect, but it's beautiful, just like starting over." I placed that vase on my kitchen counter when I got home. Every time I looked at it, it reminded me that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about shaping something new out of what's been broken. I still thought of Daniel every day. I probably always would. But the pain was changing, no longer a wound, but a scar I could live with. But just as I started healing, Daniel came back into my life, and not for the reasons I hoped. He showed up at my door after 2 years, looking thinner, older, and desperate. It was a quiet Thursday evening when I heard the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. I'd just finished dinner and was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea and scrolling through comments on my latest blog post. The knock came again, hesitant, uneven. I opened the door, and there he was. Daniel. For a moment, my breath caught in my throat. He looked different. His face was drawn. The spark in his eyes dulled. His once carefully styled hair was unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't the confident, distant man who'd pushed me away. He looked like a boy again. A broken one. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. His voice cracked on the word Mom, and something inside me twisted. I stood frozen, my mind racing. I wanted to hug him, to pull him into my arms and never let go. But there was also fear that this was temporary, that he'd vanish again and leave me shattered all over. I didn't know where else to go," he whispered. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. My voice was calm, but my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself. He walked in slowly, glancing around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. It looked different now, lighter, filled with plants and pottery and signs of the new life I'd built. He noticed the vase on the counter and stared at it for a moment. "You made that?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "It's one of my first." He smiled faintly. "It's really nice." We sat down at the table, the same spot where I'd spent countless nights crying over him. I made him tea, and for a while, neither of us spoke. He stared into his cup like it might hold the right words. "Finally," he said, "Natalie left me." The words hung in the air, heavy and awkward. I didn't know whether to feel sympathy or bitterness. "I'm sorry," I said gently, though a small, shameful part of me wasn't. He nodded, eyes fixed on the table. "We were together almost 3 years. I thought she was it. But she changed. Or maybe I did." He paused, his voice faltering. "She told me I was too emotional, too dependent. Said I needed to grow up. She said she was tired of dealing with my family issues." "Family issues?" I repeated quietly. He winced. "Yeah, she said you were too much. That I should have cut ties for good if I wanted us to work." I sat very still, my chest tightening. "So that's why you stopped talking to me?" He nodded slowly. "She made it sound like you were controlling me. Like I'd never be my own person if I kept you in my life. And I believed her. I thought she was just being honest, trying to help me set boundaries." He looked up then, eyes glistening. "I was wrong, Mom. I see that now. I hurt you for no reason." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. "You did hurt me, Daniel, more than I can ever explain." "I know," he whispered. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. I didn't know where else to go. I've been sleeping on a friend's couch. I don't have anyone else right now." I stared at him for a long moment. The mother in me wanted to rush to his side, to feed him, to offer him safety. But another part of me, the woman who'd spent 2 years rebuilding her shattered identity, hesitated. "Why didn't you come sooner?" I asked softly. He swallowed hard. "Because I was ashamed. I thought you'd hate me." "I could never hate you," I said. "But I had to learn to live without you. That wasn't easy." He looked around again, taking in the plants, the pottery, the stack of printed essays on my desk. "You've changed," he said. "I had to," I replied. "You left me with no choice." He nodded, guilt clouding his features. "I read some of your blog posts." That startled me. "You did?" He nodded again. "Michelle told me about them. She said they were helping a lot of people. I found one, the one about losing a child without a funeral. I read it 3 times. His voice broke. "You were writing about me, weren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "I didn't realize how much I'd hurt you until then," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I was setting boundaries. But I was cutting out the one person who ever truly loved me." Tears rolled down his cheeks. It was the first time I'd seen him cry since he was a teenager. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. For everything. For shutting you out, for believing lies. For making you feel like you weren't enough. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was cold. Trembling. Daniel, I said softly. I've already forgiven you. Long ago. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. He looked at me, eyes wide, almost pleading. Can I come home? Just for a while? Until I get back on my feet? That question cut through the room like a blade. I wanted to say yes immediately. To give him back the comfort he'd lost. But I also knew what it had cost me to rebuild after he left. I took a deep breath. I don't know if that's a good idea right now, I said carefully. You're welcome here for dinner, for visits, but moving back in? I think that would take us both backward. He looked hurt, but he nodded. I understand. I deserve that. For the first time, he didn't argue, didn't guilt me, didn't act entitled. He just sat there quietly, drinking his tea. For hours we talked about his mistakes, about my pain, about life and what it had taught us. There was no shouting, no drama, just raw, fragile honesty. When he finally stood to leave, I walked him to the door. He turned and hugged me tightly, desperately like he used to when he was little. I'll do better, he whispered. I promise. I hope you do, I said softly. When he asked if he could move back in with me, I realized forgiveness and foolishness were two different things. I told him I'd think about it, but actions would speak louder than apologies. After Daniel left that evening, I sat at the kitchen table long after the door had closed. His teacup was still there, a faint ring of warmth left behind. I ran my finger along the rim, thinking about all the things we'd said and all the things we hadn't. Part of me wanted to let him move back in, to give him a fresh start, a clean slate. But the other part, the one that had spent 2 years stitching my heart back together, knew better. Love without boundaries had almost destroyed me once. I wasn't going to let it happen again. The next morning, I texted him. I've been thinking about what you asked. You're welcome to come by any time for dinner or to talk, but moving in might not be best for either of us right now. He replied quickly this time. I understand, Mom. Thank you for giving me another chance. That alone felt different. No defensiveness, no guilt-tripping, just understanding. Maybe he meant what he said about changing. In the weeks that followed, Daniel started visiting regularly. Sometimes he'd show up with takeout, sometimes just to talk. He seemed quieter, more humble than before. The arrogance I'd once seen in him was gone. At first, I was cautious. I listened more than I spoke, observing the way he carried himself, the way he spoke about Natalie, about his job, about life. He was working part-time now, saving up for a new place. He said he'd started therapy to deal with his emotional walls. I didn't know whether to believe him, but I wanted to. One evening, he helped me repot a plant that had outgrown its container. As we sat on the porch, soil on our hands, he said quietly, I didn't realize how much I missed this, just being around you. I smiled faintly. It's easy to miss what we take for granted. He looked down, ashamed. I know. He kept showing up, week after week, helping me with groceries, fixing things around the house, sometimes staying late just to talk. I could see pieces of the old Daniel resurfacing, the gentle, funny boy I'd raised. But every so often, I'd glimpse something else. That flicker of entitlement, that expectation that I'd pick up the pieces whenever he faltered. One night, I caught him rummaging through the kitchen drawers. What are you looking for? I asked. My spare key, he said. Your spare key? Yeah, he said casually. The one you always kept for me. I hesitated. I don't have it anymore. He looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, I said softly, that when you left, I took it off my keychain. You don't live here anymore, Daniel. For a moment, the air between us grew heavy. Then he nodded slowly. Right, of course. He didn't argue, but his eyes said everything. He wasn't used to me setting boundaries. A few days later, I invited him over for dinner. I made roasted chicken and vegetables, the way I used to when he was in high school. We talked about light things, work, hobbies, even a few jokes. But I was still watching, still measuring the sincerity behind his words. As we cleared the dishes, I decided to test something. "Daniel," I said, "I've been thinking about selling this house next year." He froze. "Selling? Why?" "I might want something smaller. Maybe closer to town." He frowned. "But this is our house." I looked him in the eye. "No, sweetheart. It's my house." His jaw tightened. But then he let out a shaky breath. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's your house." The way he caught himself, that moment of restraint, told me he was trying, but I still wasn't convinced he'd changed deep down. Later that night, after he left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, thinking about everything. Forgiveness was a tricky thing. It felt good in theory, but it demanded constant strength in practice. I wanted to trust him, but I also wanted to protect myself. The truth was, I didn't know if Daniel loved me or for what I could still provide. A week later, I got my answer. I was at the grocery store when a friend from my pottery class, Sandra, stopped me in the aisle. "Hey, I didn't know Daniel was back in town," she said brightly. I smiled. "He's been visiting, yes." She nodded. "He mentioned you're helping him get a loan for a new car." "That's great of you." My smile froze. "A loan?" "Yeah," she said. "He told my husband last week that his mom's co-signing for him." I felt my chest tighten. "Oh, I see." When I got home, Daniel was already there, sitting on the couch, flipping through channels like he used to. "I heard something interesting today," I said, setting my bag down. He turned, confused. "What's that?" "That you've been telling people I'm helping you get a loan." His eyes widened, then darted away. "Oh, yeah, I might have mentioned that." I just assumed. "You assumed I'd say yes?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I stepped closer, my voice steady but firm. "Daniel, do you realize what that sounds like, after everything we've been through?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I wasn't trying to manipulate you, Mom. I just thought, maybe you'd help, like you always did." "Exactly," I said sharply. "That's the problem." He looked up at me, guilt spreading across his face. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to lie. I just didn't want to look like a failure in front of people." "Daniel, I love you. I always will. But I can't be the person who saves you anymore. You have to start saving yourself." He nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. "You're right. I still have a lot to learn." "I know," I said quietly. "And I hope you do learn." That night, after he left, I sat in silence again. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty, it felt powerful. I wasn't the same woman he'd once walked all over. I was stronger now, wiser, and painfully aware that love without respect was nothing but weakness. Then one day, I found out he'd been lying to me again, and this time, it changed everything. Trust, once shattered, is never the same again. After that first lie about the car loan, I told myself it was just a lapse in judgment, an old habit resurfacing, not malice. I wanted to believe that, because believing otherwise meant accepting that Daniel hadn't changed as much as I'd hoped. I gave him another chance. I always did. That's what mothers do, right? We forgive. We hope. We love, even when it hurts. For a few weeks, things seemed normal again. He stopped asking for money and started talking more about his plans, finding steady work, maybe going back to school. I listened, encouraged him, even helped him update his resume. He seemed genuinely motivated. I wanted to be proud of him again. I wanted to believe this version of him was real. Then, one afternoon, the illusion cracked. I was at the farmer's market when I ran into an old neighbor, Mrs. Turner. She was one of those women who always knew everything about everyone, but her gossip was rarely malicious, just matter of fact. She smiled warmly when she saw me. "Lillian, how lovely to see you. I ran into your Daniel the other day at the cafe downtown. Such a charming boy. He told me you two had finally patched things up. I smiled politely. Yes, we've been rebuilding. She nodded, lowering her voice. He said you're helping him buy a new apartment. How wonderful of you. I froze. I'm sorry, what did you say? An apartment, she repeated cheerfully. He said you were helping with the down payment. Said you wanted him to have a stable place to start over. I could barely respond. Oh, yes. Of course. But inside, my stomach twisted. When I got home, Daniel was already there, lounging on my couch with a plate of leftover pasta and the TV remote in hand, just like old times. Except, this wasn't old times and I wasn't the same mother he'd once manipulated. I stood quietly in the doorway for a moment, watching him laugh at the screen. He looked so at ease, so sure of his place here, that a cold realization crept through me. He wasn't testing reconciliation, he was testing boundaries. Daniel, I said finally, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through his laughter. He turned, startled. Hey Mom, you're home early. Mrs. Turner says she saw you, I said, crossing my arms. Apparently you've been telling people I'm buying you an apartment. He blinked, then let out a nervous laugh. Oh, that? She must have misunderstood. She didn't. He shifted uncomfortably, setting the plate down. I mean, I might have mentioned something like that, but I didn't mean it literally. You know how people talk. No, Daniel, I said, stepping closer. I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Why are you telling people I'm giving you money? His face darkened. You're blowing this out of proportion. Am I? I said quietly. Because it feels very familiar, this pattern of twisting words, making excuses, expecting me to clean up your mess. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Please. I wasn't lying, I didn't want people thinking I'd failed. That I was living off a friend's couch. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed? I repeated, incredulous. So you decided to use me as your excuse? He flinched but didn't answer. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. Daniel, I've spent 2 years rebuilding the pieces you broke. I've learned to forgive you, to open my heart again, to trust you. But this, I gestured around the room. This makes me feel like a fool. Mom. No, I cut him off. You don't get to mom your way out of this. You told people I was buying you an apartment, that I was your safety net again. Why? Because it's easier to let people think your mother will always rescue you? His silence was answer enough. The anger bubbling inside me wasn't loud, it was cold, sharp, and steady. I'd cried too many times for him before. This time, I was done crying. Do you remember what I said the night you came back? I asked. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting? He nodded, eyes downcast. I meant that, I said. Forgiving you meant I was willing to move forward, not pretend the past never happened. But here you are, repeating it. The lies, the manipulation, the selfishness. I'm sorry, he whispered, barely audible. I looked at him for a long time. He wasn't that little boy anymore, the one who ran to me when he was scared. He was a grown man who still used guilt and charm to get what he wanted. I think you should go, I said quietly. His head snapped up. What? Mom, no, I need space, I said firmly. Real space. Not the kind you asked for years ago to escape me, the kind I need now to save myself. He stood there, frozen, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You can't mean that. I do, I said. You've hurt me twice, Daniel. The first time broke my heart. The second time reminded me that if I keep letting you, you'll keep breaking it. He stepped forward. Please, Mom. I'll fix this. I shook my head. No, I've fixed enough for both of us. For a long, painful moment, he just stood there. His mouth opened as if to say something, then closed again. His eyes glistened, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Finally, he picked up his jacket and walked toward the door. I really am sorry, he said softly. I know you are, I replied. But sorry doesn't build trust. It just fills silence. The door closed behind him, and the house fell quiet again, that same suffocating quiet I'd once feared. But this time, it felt different. This time, it was mine. I sat down on the couch where he'd been and stared at the empty space beside me. The ache in my chest was heavy, but it wasn't the ache of loss anymore. It was the ache of release, the kind that comes when you finally stop holding on to someone who doesn't want to be held accountable. That night, I wrote one final letter. Not to him, to myself. I promised that I would never again confuse love with loyalty, that I would choose peace over guilt, that I would never beg for respect from my own child. That night, I made the hardest decision a mother could make, to finally cut my son out of my life. I wrote him one last letter, not to beg, but to close the chapter. It took me 3 days to find the strength to write it. Every time I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper, my hands trembled. How do you say goodbye to your own child, not because they've died, but because the love that once held you together has turned into something that hurts to touch? The words wouldn't come at first. I wrote, crossed out, and rewrote the same sentence over and over. But finally, I just started, not with anger, not even with grief, but with truth. I told Daniel that I loved him, that I would always love him, that nothing he could ever do would erase that. But I also told him I couldn't keep trying to hold a relationship that only existed when it was convenient for him. I told him I forgave him for everything, for shutting me out, for lying, for making me feel small. But I also forgave myself for clinging too tightly, for letting my worth depend on his attention, for losing myself in the process of loving him. I told him I wanted peace, not proximity. Healing, not history. When I finished, I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it on the counter. My chest ached, but in a strange way, I felt lighter. I mailed it the next morning. No text, no warning, just the letter, quietly sent to the same apartment address he'd given me months earlier. It was the first time I'd ever let go without trying to control what happened next. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I blocked his number, his social media, every possible way he could reach me. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to stop reopening the wound every time he decided to knock. The silence that followed felt different this time. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of rejection, but the soft, calm silence of relief. It was the sound of boundaries being honored. That first week without contact, I thought I'd break. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, instinctively reaching for my phone, then remembering there would be no messages, no apologies, no explanations. And strangely, I was okay with that. Grief doesn't always end with tears. Sometimes it ends with acceptance. In the weeks that followed, I started to feel my life stretch again, like something inside me was making room for new beginnings. I wrote more than ever, not about Daniel specifically, but about forgiveness, resilience, and learning to love yourself again after loss. One of my essays, "The Goodbye That Saved Me," went viral. Mothers from all over wrote to me, saying my words gave them the courage to let go too. That connection, that shared pain turned into purpose, became my anchor. Through my writing, I began to understand something profound. Cutting someone out of your life doesn't always mean hate. Sometimes it means love. Love for yourself. Love for peace. Love for the version of you that finally deserves rest. Still, there were moments when the ache returned. Like the time I passed by the bakery that used to sell his favorite lemon bars, or when I saw a mother and son arguing in a grocery store. I smiled then, because at least they were talking. I wasn't bitter anymore. Just grateful for what had been, and wiser for what was lost. Months passed. The house felt peaceful now, quiet, but not empty. The same walls that once echoed with grief now carried the scent of candles, fresh paint, and new life. I'd redecorated the living room, replaced old photos with art I'd created, and filled the shelves with pottery pieces that told my story of survival. Every now and then, I thought about whether he'd read the letter, whether he understood it, whether he hated me or finally saw me. But I didn't dwell on it. Because for the first time in years, his choices didn't dictate my emotions. I had let go fully, completely, and without regret. One afternoon, I found myself scrolling through my blog comments when a message caught my eye. It was from someone anonymous. The username was simple, D. It read, "Your words hurt to read, but they're true. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was him. There was no proof, but something about the tone, the brevity, the quiet remorse felt familiar. For a moment, I almost replied. I almost said, "I am happy. I hope you are too." But I didn't. Some things are better left unspoken. Instead, I closed my laptop and went for a walk, the sun warm on my skin, the air full of possibility. I realized then that closure doesn't always come through conversation. Sometimes, it comes through peace. By the time the sun began to set, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not for the pain I'd endured, but for the strength it had given me. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for reconciliation, but for release. But the universe wasn't done with me. Daniel reached out again, this time through someone unexpected. When Michelle told me Daniel wanted to see me again, I almost laughed. It had been nearly a year since I sent Daniel that final letter, the one that closed a chapter I thought would never reopen. Life had grown gentle again. My mornings were filled with pottery, coffee, and sunlight. My evenings were quiet, peaceful, often spent reading by the window. I'd learned to breathe without waiting for his call, to live without expecting his apology. Then, one afternoon, as I was cleaning up after class, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Michelle. "Lillian, can I stop by? There's something important we need to talk about." Michelle rarely used the word important. She wasn't one for drama, so her message instantly set my heart racing. When she arrived, I offered her tea, but she waved it off, her face unusually serious. "It's about Daniel," she said. Just hearing his name sent a ripple through me, not quite pain, not quite longing, but something in between. "What about him?" I asked cautiously. "He reached out to me," she said, watching my reaction. "He said he's been seeing your blog posts, that he's read all of them." I froze. "All of them?" She nodded. "He said they broke him, Lillian. He wanted to talk to you, but he didn't know how. So he asked me to tell you that he's been going to therapy, that he's trying to be better." I didn't know what to say. The last time I'd seen Daniel, he'd left my house after betraying me for the second time. I had vowed never to let him hurt me again, and now here he was, reaching out, not directly, but through my closest friend. I took a long breath. "What does he want?" Michelle hesitated. "Closure. He said he doesn't expect you to take him back into your life. He just wants to apologize face to face." I looked down at my hands, at the faint traces of clay under my nails. They were hands that had built and rebuilt a life from pieces he'd shattered. Did I really want to hand him the power to touch those pieces again? "I don't know, Michelle," I said quietly. "Every time I let him back in, he tears the wound open. I can't go through that again." She nodded gently. "You don't have to, but maybe hearing him out isn't about him this time. Maybe it's about you." That night, I barely slept. Memories kept flooding back his first words, his laughter as a boy, his coldness as a man. I tried to imagine what I'd say if I saw him again, but every version of the conversation ended the same way, with silence. Still, something in me knew I couldn't ignore this forever. Not because I owed him anything, but because part of me still wanted to make peace with the pain. A week later, I agreed to meet him. I told Michelle to set it up somewhere neutral, no home turf for either of us. She suggested a small cafe downtown, the same one I used to take Daniel to after his soccer games when he was little. It felt poetic, in a bittersweet way. When I arrived, he was already there. He looked up the moment I walked in, and for a second, time folded in on itself. The last image I had of him was of that night, him standing in the doorway, guilt in his eyes, as I told him to leave. But now, he looked different. Not just older, but calmer, grounded. "Hi, Mom," he said softly as I sat down. "Hi, Daniel." There was a long silence before either of us spoke again. The clinking of cups and low murmur of other customers filled the space between us. He cleared his throat. I didn't come to ask for anything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, really sorry. I studied him, waiting for the familiar signs, excuses, defensiveness, manipulation, but they never came. His shoulders were slumped, his voice steady but sincere. I've been in therapy for almost a year, he continued. It's made me face a lot of things I didn't want to admit before. I realized I used people, especially you, to fill the holes in myself that I was too afraid to fix. I said nothing. I wanted to let him speak without interruption. I told myself I cut you out because I needed space, he said, eyes glistening. But really, it was because I couldn't stand to see myself in your disappointment. Every time you looked at me, I felt like I wasn't good enough, and instead of growing, I ran. I hurt you because I didn't know how to face my own shame. Tears welled in my eyes, not from pain this time, but from recognition. I could hear truth in his words. For the first time, he wasn't speaking from pride, he was speaking from humility. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said softly. And I don't want to come back into your life if it would hurt you. I just needed you to know I understand now. I understand what I did. I nodded slowly. I do forgive you, Daniel, I said, my voice trembling. But not because you asked. I forgave you long ago because I couldn't heal while holding on to hate. He wiped at his eyes, his voice cracking. Thank you. That means more than you know. We sat there for a while longer, talking quietly. Not about the past, not really, but about how we'd both changed. He told me about his new job at a local art gallery, how he'd started volunteering at a youth center on weekends. I told him about my pottery classes, my blog, the community of women who'd become my chosen family. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't even reconciliation. It was closure. A gentle, human moment between two people who had finally stopped trying to fix each other. When we stood to leave, he reached out, hesitant, and I let him hug me. It wasn't the desperate hug from before, it was soft, respectful, final. Take care of yourself, Mom, he said quietly. I will, I replied. And you do the same. We walked out of the cafe in opposite directions, no promises, no tears, just peace. As we hugged goodbye, I felt closure, not reunion, but release. Love doesn't always mean staying sometimes, it means letting go gracefully. After that meeting at the cafe, something in me shifted. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't sorrow, it was something quieter, something steadier. For the first time in years, I felt at peace with what had happened between Daniel and me. The conversation hadn't magically erased the pain, but it gave it a name. It gave it meaning. For so long, I had believed that love meant proximity. That being a good mother meant never letting go, no matter how much it hurt. But now, sitting in the stillness of my home, I understood what I hadn't before. Love doesn't always hold tight. Sometimes, love loosens its grip. In the weeks after that meeting, I found myself thinking about him differently. Not as my lost son, not as the boy who broke my heart, but as a man flawed, growing, learning, just like me. I stopped checking his social media. I didn't wait for messages. I didn't crave updates. I had finally detached love from expectation. That's when I realized I didn't need him to come back for me to feel whole. My mornings took on a rhythm of their own. I'd wake early, make tea, and sit by the window watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft gold. The world outside seemed calmer now that the storm inside me had settled. I'd spend hours in the pottery studio shaping clay, my fingers moving instinctively, molding something beautiful out of something raw and ordinary. That's what healing felt like, taking the messy, unshaped pieces of yourself and giving them form again. One morning, while glazing a new piece, I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been over the years. The young mother terrified of doing everything wrong. The woman abandoned by her husband but determined to hold her family together. The grieving mother begging for her son's attention. The broken woman who thought she'd failed. Each of those versions had loved fiercely, even when love cost her everything. But now, I was becoming someone new, someone who loved without losing herself. I decided to write about that. That week, I published a post titled, "The Love That Learns to Let Go." I wrote about the difference between attachment and love, about how motherhood changes but never truly ends. I wrote that, sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to step back and allow space for both people to grow separately. The post resonated deeply. Hundreds of comments poured in from readers who'd experienced the same quiet heartbreak of letting go: mothers, fathers, siblings, friends. Some thanked me for saying what they couldn't. Others confessed they were still in the thick of their own grief. I read every comment, responding to as many as I could. But one stood out. It said, "You didn't lose him, you both just grew in different directions, and sometimes, that's still love." That line stayed with me. Because it was true. Daniel and I hadn't ended, we had simply evolved into something different. I started seeing love everywhere again, not just the kind that ties people together, but the kind that frees them. In the quiet patience of my students at pottery class, in Michelle's steady friendship, in the laughter of strangers on the street. Love wasn't confined to one relationship, it lived in every connection that brought warmth into my life. I also started mentoring women in my support group who were going through estrangement. We'd meet, in the evenings, a circle of mothers sitting together, sharing stories through tears and laughter. Some were just beginning their journey, others were years into it. But we all carried the same wound and the same hope for healing. One night after one of those meetings, Michelle said to me, "You know, Lillian, you've turned your pain into a bridge for others." Her words brought tears to my eyes. Maybe that was my purpose now, not to fix what was broken, but to help others find strength in their own cracks. That realization made me feel lighter. Like I'd finally stepped out of a long shadow. Every so often, I'd think of Daniel. I wondered if he ever read my newer posts. If he'd found peace too. But I didn't dwell on it. For once, I didn't need to know. I trusted that whatever path he was on, it was his to walk just as mine was mine. One Sunday afternoon, I was rearranging my living room when I found an old photo tucked behind a stack of books. It was one of Daniel and me from his 10th birthday. We were both laughing, frosting on our noses, caught mid-celebration. For a moment, I just stared at it, smiling through the ache. I didn't cry this time. I didn't feel regret. Just warmth, the kind that comes from remembering something precious without needing it to return. I placed the photo in a new frame and set it on a shelf next to one of my handmade vases. It felt right there, a reminder not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd learned. Because love, I realized, isn't about possession. It's not about control or closeness. It's about acceptance, the kind that allows two people to exist separately and still wish each other well. I'd spent years believing that being a mother meant holding on. But maybe true motherhood was about knowing when to let go with grace. Trusting that love could survive even in silence. That night, I went to bed feeling lighter than I had in years. The kind of lightness that comes only after you've forgiven everything, including yourself. But one last surprise from Daniel reminded me how far we'd both come. On my 46th birthday, a small package arrived at my door. It was a quiet morning, the kind of morning that felt ordinary but carried a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I hadn't planned anything big for my birthday. Michelle had dropped by the day before with a bottle of wine and a card that made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. I'd received a few messages from readers of my blog, each one kind and heartfelt. I thought that was it. That my birthday would come and go quietly, like a gentle breeze through an open window. But then, just as I was finishing breakfast, the doorbell rang. On my porch sat a small brown package, no return label. Just my name, written neatly across the top in familiar handwriting. My heart stopped. I didn't need to guess who it was from. I carried it inside carefully, my fingers trembling as I set it on the kitchen counter. For a long moment, I just stared at it, afraid to open it. Afraid of what emotions might come rushing back the moment I did. Finally, I took a deep breath, tore through the tape, and lifted the lid. Inside was a handmade pottery vase, small, simple, imperfectly beautiful. The glaze was uneven in places, streaked with shades of blue and cream. It wasn't the work of a professional, but of someone who had poured emotion into every curve and imperfection. My breath caught as I turned it over in my hands. At the bottom, etched into the clay, were 4 words: "For the woman who stayed." I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth. There was a note inside, 2 folded neatly, written in the same familiar handwriting I hadn't seen in so long. It said, "Mom, I saw your pottery pieces online, the ones you sold for charity. They're beautiful. I wanted to try making something myself, and, well, this was the result. It's not perfect, but I didn't want it to be. I wanted it to be real like us. Thank you for loving me even when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for letting me find my way back on my own. I hope this vase reminds you that I see you now not just as my mother, but as a woman who never gave up on herself. Happy birthday. Daniel. Asterisk. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. But these weren't the tears of heartbreak or grief that had once been my constant companions. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of a deep, quiet joy I hadn't expected to feel again. I ran my fingers over the uneven ridges of the vase, marveling at the symbolism of it. The son who once broke me had learned to create something fragile yet strong, something that, like me, had cracks but still held beauty. I placed the vase gently on the kitchen counter, right next to the first one I'd ever made. The 2 pieces sat side by side, different yet somehow connected, one born from pain, the other from healing. As I stood there, looking at them, I realized that this was closure. Not a dramatic reconciliation, not tears or promises, but a quiet acknowledgement that we had both survived, both grown, both changed. I didn't call him that day. I didn't even send a thank you right away. Instead, I spent the rest of my birthday in stillness, letting the meaning of his gift settle inside me. Later that afternoon, Michelle stopped by with a small cake. She noticed the vase immediately. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It is," I replied. "He made it." Her eyes widened. "Daniel?" I nodded. She smiled. That's huge, Lillian." I exhaled slowly, smiling too. "It is. And it's enough." We sat together for a while, eating cake and talking about life, not the past, but the present. For the first time, I didn't feel like my story revolved around loss. It revolved around growth, resilience, and the strange, miraculous way love could transform without disappearing. That evening, I finally sent Daniel a message. It was short, simple, and honest. "The vase is perfect. Thank you, Daniel. I'm proud of you," he replied a few minutes later. "I'm proud of you too, Mom." Just that, no long explanations, no apologies, no promises. And yet, it was enough. It was everything. As the sun set that night, I sat by the window, the golden light spilling across my kitchen counter, glinting off both vases, the old and the new. I traced the edges of Daniel's gift and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not for getting my son back, but for getting myself back, and for the beautiful truth that the 2 things no longer had to be the same. Love, I realized, had come full circle. Not the kind of love that demanded or begged, but the kind that simply existed, gentle, forgiving, enduring. Daniel didn't need to move back home. We didn't need to talk every day. We didn't need to be what we once were. The love between us had changed shape, but it was still there, steady and quiet, like the vase on my counter, perfectly imperfect. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. I finally understood that cutting him out wasn't the end, it was the beginning of my freedom. I'm not the same woman who begged for her son's attention, and I never will be again. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after surviving something that once broke you. It's quiet, steady, and deeply earned. That's what my life feels like now, not perfect, not easy, but peaceful in a way I never thought possible. It's been almost 3 years since Daniel walked back into my life with that vase. Since then, we've built something new, not what we had before, but something honest. We talk occasionally, short messages, birthday wishes, updates about his work at the gallery. There are no more promises, no more tears, no more emotional storms, just simple, mutual respect. And that, I've learned, is its own kind of love. These days, I wake up early. Not because I have to, but because I want to. I love watching the sunrise creep across my kitchen walls, hitting the two vases on the counter, one from my beginning, one from his. They remind me that brokenness can be beautiful when it leads to growth. My blog has grown into something bigger than I ever imagined. What started as a place to pour my pain has become a sanctuary for women all over the world. Mothers, daughters, wives, people who've loved deeply and lost painfully. They share their stories, their struggles, and somehow, we heal together. I write not from bitterness anymore, but from understanding. I write about healing, self-worth, forgiveness, all the lessons that took me years to learn. I don't hide the scars, I honor them. Because they're proof that I've lived, that I've loved, and that I've survived. Sometimes, when I get emails from readers saying things like, "Your story saved me from losing myself too," I cry not from sadness, but from gratitude. Because if my heartbreak could become a lantern for someone else, then it wasn't wasted. Michelle often jokes that I've turned my pain into a profession. Maybe she's right. But to me, it's more than that, it's purpose. It's the proof that life can bloom again, even after everything falls apart. A few months ago, Daniel visited. It wasn't planned, he just texted, "Can I stop by?" And for once, the question didn't send me spiraling. I said yes. He came in carrying a small potted plant, a peace lily. "For you," he said. Figured it would match the vases. It was such a simple gesture. But it meant more than he could ever know. We had tea. Talked about light, things, work, mutual friends, even the weather. No tension, no guilt. Just two people who had finally learned to exist without hurting each other. Before he left, he hugged me, warm, steady, familiar. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. I smiled. "I'm proud of us," I replied. When the door closed behind him, there was no ache this time, no lingering emptiness, just quiet contentment. That's the thing about healing, you don't always notice it happening. One day, you just realize the pain doesn't control you anymore. That the memories that once shattered you now make you smile softly instead of cry. I've learned that motherhood doesn't end when your children grow distant. It evolves. It teaches you the hardest kind of love, the kind that lets go and still wishes them well. The kind that no longer demands closeness to feel connected. Sometimes people write to me asking, "Do you ever regret cutting him off?" And I always answer truthfully, no. Because it wasn't about punishment, it was about preservation. I had to lose him to find myself. And in finding myself, I gave both of us the chance to start again separately, but stronger. I've also learned that forgiveness isn't a one-time act. It's a daily choice. Some days, it's easy. Others, it takes effort. But I keep choosing it, because holding on to anger only ties me to a version of myself I've outgrown. The woman I am now doesn't chase love. She doesn't beg for attention. She doesn't build her worth around anyone else's approval, not even her son's. She knows her value. She knows her peace. And most importantly, she knows she can survive anything. On quiet nights, I often sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the stars scatter across the sky. I think about the girl I used to be, the one who cried over unanswered texts, who stood outside her son's door begging for a conversation, who thought love meant sacrifice without end. I want to reach back through time and tell her, "You'll be okay, you'll find yourself again. And when you do, you'll realize you were never truly lost, just waiting to be rediscovered." The world outside my window hums, softly distant laughter, the sound of crickets, the life I've rebuilt moving quietly around me. It's not grand or extraordinary, but it's mine. Entirely mine. Sometimes I think about how my story started, a mother trying to hold on to a son who didn't want to be held. And I smile. Because it didn't end with loss. It ended with liberation. I still love Daniel. I always will, but I love myself too, and that's the kind of love I was missing all along. My journey taught me that sometimes, you have to be broken open to grow. That sometimes love means walking away, not to punish, but to preserve the best parts of who you are. I used to believe that cutting him out was cruel. Now I know it was an act of mercy for both of us. Because in that painful distance, we both found the space to become who we were meant to be. As I sit here tonight, the soft light of the lamps reflecting off the vases, I whisper a quiet truth I've earned through every tear, every silence, every heartbreak. Because sometimes, the only way to heal from being cut out is to cut back and finally choose yourself.